Hello, welcome to this video lecture on Aristotle. This topic is included in the paper Literary Criticism, which is a core paper for the 5th semester BA English Language and Literature students of the University of Kerala. In this video, we will be discussing part 1 of Aristotle. Who was Aristotle? Aristotle is universally acknowledged as the master of critical thought. He was the most distinguished Hellenistic philosopher of the 4th century BC. He is considered as the first scientific critic and wrote critical treatises on a variety of subjects. Aristotle was born at Stagirus, a small city in a part of Macedonia, in 384 BC. At the age of 17, he joined the academy at Athens and studied under Plato. In the year 342 BC, Aristotle was invited to Pella, the capital of Macedonia, by King Philip to tutor his 13-year-old son Alexander. When Alexander became king, Aristotle returned to Athens and set up his own school, the Lyceum. Aristotle is the first scientific critic, and his literary criticism is largely embodied in the Poetics. The Poetics, published in 350 BC, is a very important, a seminal work of classical criticism. It marks the beginning of literary criticism on a systematic basis. The Poetics is a short treatise of 26 chapters. It can be divided into 6 parts. Part 1, which includes chapters 1 to 5, gives an introduction on poetry and classification of poetry. Part 2, chapters 6 to 19, discusses tragedy. Part 3, chapters 20 to 22, discusses poetic diction, style, and vocabulary. Part 4, chapter 23, discusses narrative poetry and tragedy. Part 5, chapters 24 and 25, discusses epic and comparison with tragedy. The last part, part 6, which includes chapter 26, contains objections of critics against poetry and Aristotle's responses to these critical objections. Aristotle scrutinized literature as a province of knowledge with a concrete body of material of its own, namely existing Greek literature. He undertakes a genuine exploration of the truth. Aristotle studied poetry in relation to man, and he believed that art molds and develops human character and that its effect is healthy. Now, Plato was the first critic to use the term mimesis or imitation. Aristotle refutes Plato's concept that art is only an imitation of an imitation. In the Poetics, Aristotle defines poetry as a medium of imitation or mimesis that seeks to recreate life and reality through the imaginative medium of beauty. He emphasized that good art had the capacity to mold and change human character. Therefore, the poet should imitate things as they are thought to be, and things as they ought to be. Human actions and human beings themselves are the objects of imitation in art. Therefore, his basic contention is that mimesis is the underlying principle of all arts. The core of Aristotle's discussion in the Poetics is concerned chiefly with the analysis of tragedy. Aristotle's celebrated definition of tragedy is: tragedy is the imitation of an action, serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, in language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in separate parts of the play in the form of action, not of narrative. through pity and fear, effecting the proper catharsis or the purgation of these emotions. Now, in this famous definition, Aristotle enumerates six formative elements in tragedy. They are plot, character, thought, diction, song, and spectacle. Aristotle lays emphasis on three important elements of tragedy, which are plot, character, and thought. A plot is the soul of tragedy. It is the structure of events and it should essentially have a proper beginning, a middle, and an end. Tragedy imitates men in action and their deeds matter more than their character. Aristotle also distinguishes between simple plots and complex plots. Now, the features of a complex plot would be first, the exposition. The plot unfolds through a series of incidents. So each tragedy begins with an exposition of some past event or some other background. It establishes the setting, it introduces the major characters, and so on. Now, next comes the rising action, the conflict that propels the play towards the central theme or the climax. So, the climax, also called the crisis, is typically set in the third act of the play, and it is the moment of greatest tension and uncertainty. This is a graphic representation of Aristotle's tragic plot or complex plot structure. The inciting incident, the beginning, is the exposition, and then you have the rising action, unfolding chain of events, the conflict that leads to the climax. The climax is represented by the red star in the middle. Now, what happens at the climax? The complex plot achieves the climax or dramatic impact through certain devices. These include peripeteia, which means reversal or change or turn of events, and anagnorisis, which is discovery or recognition of the truth, and pathos, which means pity and suffering. Now, the situations in a tragedy are most often the consequences of human error. So, peripeteia, as mentioned earlier, it is a reversal, it is a change of fortune in classical tragedy that eventually leads to the protagonist's downfall. Now, anagnorisis refers to that particular event in the life of the protagonist when he discovers his tragic flaws. He realizes the truth, and this makes him vulnerable and weak. But the nobility of the protagonist lies in the fact that he does not defend or justify his tragic flaw. So, this leads to a turn of events and the falling action. So, the falling action is the ultimate tragic flaw, which should evoke pity and fear, the twin emotions that that create catharsis or a kind of purification, and finally leads to the catastrophe in a tragedy. Now, the denouement is the final stage which provides closure to a tragedy. Now, Aristotle also places great emphasis on the unity of action. The plot, according to Aristotle, should essentially have three stages of evolution. The beginning is a situation that has definite consequences but not necessarily obvious causes. And the advancement of the plot, the rising action, leads to the climax where all the action takes place. And the middle, therefore, should be a situation that includes both causes and consequences, and the end has situations that has causes but not necessarily consequences of interest to the viewers or the readers. Now, the events or the incidents in a tragedy should be intimately connected with one another and they appear together as one whole unit. This organic unity enables a tragedy to express universal themes powerfully. Now, the other classical unities of time and place are not mentioned in the Aristotelian concept of a complex plot. I hope you found this video useful. As I mentioned earlier, this is part 1 of Aristotle. I will be discussing the other elements of a tragedy in the second part of this video lecture. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Stay safe.